Alrighty, so now we are going to jump into some opening lines and we're going to explore gratitude. So, what does gratitude look like to you? We will write for 5 minutes. Feel free to plug your answer into the chat or share aloud when you are ready. So, for 5 minutes, we'll listen to some music and we'll do some writing. Yes, definitely continue to think about what gratitude looks like for you all. But for the sake of time, we are going to move on and continue to keep dropping things in the chat. Alrighty. So I am going to introduce our lovely author for today's salon, Ross Gay. Just text him in the chat just so he knows to enable his camera. So Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry, Against Which, Bringing the Shovel Down, Beholding, winner of the PEN American Literary Jane Stein Award, and Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, winner of the 2015 National Book Critics Circle Award and the 2016 Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award. In addition to his poetry, Ross has released 3 collections of essays. The Book of Delights was released in 2019 and was a New York Times bestseller. Inciting Joy was released in 2022. And his newest collection, The Book of More Delights, was released in September of 2023. All right, you all give a warm welcome to Ross Gay. Ross, I will pass it over to you. Yes, Coliana, the silent claps.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to see you all. I'm glad to be with you. And it was fun to just be in the presence of all that gratitude. That feels good. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about my kind of journey, which is ongoing, I should say, but a little bit about how maybe I came to be a writer, which is it's always like kind of the best I can do is a kind of digression. But let me start by saying that I wasn't at all a writer as a kid. Like I didn't really do school. I went to school, but I didn't really do school. You know, I was like, the thing that was interesting to me about school was like getting out of it, you know? And so I wasn't at all interested in class. I was interested in like, you know, fucking off in class. Actually, that's sort of, but the older I get, and I want to encourage you to also like have a jump start on this actually, the more I'm like, oh, you know what? A lot of the stuff that you weren't doing in school, or, you know, that you were, you know, being bad in school. And like, I wasn't being bad. I was just being like, you know, creative. I'm like, oh, you were practicing. You were actually learning how to be a writer, how to be an artist, how to think sort of antagonistically, how to think outside of maybe a box or something. You were learning how to experiment. And so, for example, you know, one time I was, I had you know, we had our lockers. I don't know if they still do lockers in high school, but, you know, I put my lunch in my locker, and I forgot that I'd left a piece of fruit in my locker. And I came back after the weekend, and there was fruit flies all kind of around my locker and in the hallway. And I was like, whoa, that's awesome. So then like once a week, I just put a piece of fruit in my locker, and there would now, you know, I know that that's like a pain in the ass, but when I look back at that little kid who was like, you know, not very interested in school, I was interested in football and basketball. That's what I was interested in. I look back at that kid, I'm like, oh, you were interested in thinking and playing and experimenting. But school wasn't necessarily the setting for you. Or maybe it was the setting in which you needed to sort of resist in some way. I'm not sure. And I have like 1,000 examples of that. But that's the long and short of that is to say that I wasn't thinking of myself as a writer at all until I got to college. And I was introduced to some poets, one poet in particular named Amiri Baraka, when I was very close to failing out of school, actually in college. I played football in college. But I had a professor, it's very moving actually, a white professor, who he must have been able to tell that I was kind of like slipping in the class. And he gave me, I suspect there were maybe 2 non-white writers on this. It was a class of like 20th century American poetry or something. And I was the only, I'm going to think I was probably the only, maybe there was one other like not white, black kid in the class. And he took a risk and it was like, you're going to present on the black guy. And sometimes, certain scenes, it could be like, oh, you should have done that. He did me the best favor, and from that, I started reading poems very seriously. And then I started reading like across. I read all of Baraka, but then I started reading, Sylvia Plath and Mark Strand and Sonny Sanchez and Lucille Clifton and June Jordan and on and on and on. And but I like to remember him, David Johnson, who I've had the opportunity to tell him that many times, enough that he's like, I got it. I got it. But that was very important. And from that point, I started reading poetry seriously and I started writing poetry seriously. And I carried on and I went to graduate school. And the main thing that I can sort of offer in terms of like how my writing life, I feel like has thrived and thrives, is that throughout I've sort of been lucky enough, grateful enough to find myself in these communities. And so as a college student, when I was sort of learning this stuff, I became real good friends with folks who were in theater or were, doing other kinds of music and stuff like that. And some of whom, my friend Brooke and I just had a collaborative sort of opera that was just put on. We've been friends for 30 years and we just did a project together very recently. And then when I was in grad school, same thing happened. I had wonderful teachers, but I also made friends with people who cared about my work and about whose work I cared very deeply. And just this morning, I was reading new work to one of those people. His name is Patrick Rosal, one of my best friends, but someone without whom I don't know what my writing life would be at all, So that's, in a way, that's me saying that I think I can speak for me, but it seems when I look around to be true beyond me, that one of the most important things we can do as writers, but also as people, of course, is to like practice being in community, and whether that means, that means many things. And that might mean like showing up for people's readings or like reading each other's work or checking in on each other, or when someone's sick, dropping off soup, or, when someone needs a loan and you got the money, give them the loan, and blah, 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 on and on and on. It's simple. It can seem unsimple, but it's actually simple. It's kind of just what we do. And the same thing in the writing community. It's sort of like, oh, okay, like here's a reading I can set you up with. Let me do that. Or like, hey, I know this friend who's got a little chapbook press. Let me introduce you to them. Like, I love your work or whatever. Sharing. That's kind of the deal. The last thing I wanted to say before, and I'm sure in the Q&A, other questions will show up. I've lately been thinking a lot about the music that I listened to as a kid. So there's sort of a famous, to me, no one else, story about being a little kid and listening on headphones to Earth, Wind, and Fire's greatest hits and reading the lyrics. And I was probably like 11 or 12. And my mom and dad were sitting, I can picture them. I'm sitting right in front of the stereo. They're probably watching like Falcon Crest or something on the TV. That's an 80s TV show. I can see there's like 4 people who know what I'm talking about. And I'm like listening and reading the things, but I could hear my dad, who was a huge reader. My dad was always reading. And he wasn't around to see my first book come out, it would have been sweet. But I was reading the lyrics so closely, and how I do with music, like I like to listen to songs over and over again. So I could hear my dad through my headphones. I could hear him say, well, at least he's reading something. That's how little I read sort of conventionally, but I was reading lyrics all the time. So like because this is back in the day too, when you would have like a tape or a CD or a record, and you would have liner notes and you'd get to study the lyrics. So De La Soul and Public Enemy and Tracy Chapman and Earth, Wind, and Fire and U2 and other people. Enya, big into Enya. I think she had 3 lyrics. It's like sail away, sail away, sail away. So anyway, so that's kind of, and anyway, then, eventually, like I started after graduate school, I started publishing poems very slowly, always by people who I was in community with, being like, hey, send a poem into this thing. I'm like kind of affiliated with this thing. Or like, oh, you should give a reading at so-and-so. Let's all read together. And someone at the reading saying, hey, I have a little magazine. Would you want to send that thing that you just read? So again, it's sort of like, and then, books came and this and that. But the most important thing is the community thing. I feel certain of that, because without it, it doesn't actually feel very interesting. So is that okay to turn now into reading a little bit?
Yeah, if you like.
That's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. I'm going to read for you for, I think, I'm terrible with clocks. But I think I should read for about 10 to 15 minutes. Is that about right? Okay. I'll read like 3 or 4 poems. This first poem is called To the Fig Tree on 9th and Christian. And what I want you to know, I don't want it to slip by, is that this is basically, it's a kind of, this is one of those poems in which the poet is the speaker. It's me. It mostly is. And I was walking on the street in Philadelphia, I can't remember, in 2014 or something, and there was a fig tree that was, I saw a woman sweeping, and I realized, oh, you're sweeping up figs from a tree. Like, what in the world? This is Philadelphia. Wasn't like, it wasn't Sicily, So, to the fig tree on 9th and Christian. Tumbling through the city in my mind without once looking up, the racket and the lug work, probably rehearsing some stupid thing I said or did, some crime or other. The city, they say, is a lonely place until, yes, the sound of sweeping. And a woman, yes, with a broom, beneath which you are now, to the canopy of a fig, its arms pulling the September sun to it. And she has a hose too, and so works hard, rinsing and scrubbing the sidewalk, lest some poor sod slip on the silk of a fig and break his hip and not probably reach over to gobble up the perpetrator. The light catches the veins in her hands when I ask about the tree. They flutter in the air, and she says, take as much as you can, please help me. So I load my pockets and mouth, and she points to the step ladder against the wall to me and take more, please. But I was without a sack, and so my meager plunder would have to suffice. And an old woman whom gravity was pulling into the earth loosed one from a low-slung branch, and its eye wept like hers, which she dabbed with a kerchief as she cleaved the fig with what remained of her teeth. And soon there were 8 or 9 people gathered beneath the tree, looking into it, pointing like a constellation. Do you see it? And I am tall, and so good for these things. And a bald man even told me so when I grabbed 3 or 4 for him, reaching into the giddy throngs of yellow jackets, Sugarstone, which he only pointed to, smiling and rubbing his stomach. I mean, he was really rubbing his stomach, like there was a baby in there. It was hot. His head shone while he offered recipes to the group using words which I couldn't understand. And besides, I was a little tipsy on the dance of the velvety heart rolling in my mouth, pulling me down and down into the oldest countries of my body, where I ate my first fig from the hand of a man who escaped his country by swimming through the night. And maybe never said more than 5 words to me at once, but he gave me figs. And a man on his way to work hops twice to reach at last his fig, which he smiles at and calls baby. Come here, baby, he says, and blows a kiss to the tree, which everyone knows cannot grow this far north, being Mediterranean and favoring the rocky, sun-baked soils of Jordan and Sicily, but no one told the fig tree or the immigrants. There's a way the fig tree grows in groves. It seems it wants to hold us. Yes, I am anthropomorphizing, goddammit. I have twice in the last 30 seconds rubbed my sweaty forearm against someone else's sweaty shoulder, gleeful eating out of each other's hands on Christian Street in Philadelphia, a city like most which has murdered its own people. This is true. We are feeding each other from a tree at the corner of Christian and 9th, strangers maybe never again. This one is called Ode to buttoning and unbuttoning my shirt. If I was better prepared, I'd have a shirt with buttons on it, but I only have two of them. So, but I also want to say that there's a writer named Nazım Hikmet, Turkish writer, who I'm sort of invoking in this poem. And he's a poet. He was actually incarcerated in Turkey. He was a communist. He was a political prisoner for years. And he would write these poems, and in the poems he would say things about, thinking of his beloved, or thinking about, a tree, or thinking about the outdoors, and he would say things like, this is not something to be taken lightly. Ode to buttoning and unbuttoning my shirt. No one knew, or at least I didn't know they knew, what the thin discs threaded here on my shirt might give me in terms of joy. This is not something to be taken lightly. The gift of buttoning one's shirt slowly top to bottom, or bottom to top, or sometimes the buttons will be on the other side, and I'm a woman that morning. Slipping the glass through its slot, I tread differently that day, or some of it, anyway. My conversations are different, and the car bomb slicing the air and the people in it for a quarter mile. And a honeybee's legs furred with pollen mean another thing to me than on the other days, which too have been drizzled in this simplest of joys, in this world of spaceships and subatomic this and that, 2, maybe 3 times a day, some days. I have the distinct pleasure from slowly untethering the one side from the other, which is like unbuckling a stack of vertebrae with delicacy, for I must only use the tips of my fingers with which I will one day close my mother's eyes. This is as delicate as we can be in this life. Practicing like this, giving the raft of our hands to the clumsy spider and blowing soft until she lifts her damp heft and crawls off, we practice like this, pushing the seed into the earth like this, first in the morning and then at night. We practice sliding the bones home. Okay. I want to read this one called Feet. Friends, mine are ugly feet. The body's common wreckage stuffed into boots. The second toe on the left foot is crooked enough that when a child asks, what's that, of it, I can, without flinch or fear of doubt, lie that a cow stepped on it, which maybe makes them fear cows, for which I repent, in love as I am with those philosophical beasts who would never smash my feet, nor sneer at them the way my mother does. We always bought you good shoes, honey. She says, you can't blame us for those things. And for this and other reasons, I have never indulged in the pleasure of flip-flops, shy or ashamed, digging my toes like 10 tiny ostriches into the sand at the beach with friends who I'm not sure love me. No, I don't think Tina loved me. She liked me, I think, but said to me as we sat on lawn chairs beside a pool where I lifeguarded and was meticulous at obscuring from view with a book or towel my screwy friends, you have pretty feet. In that gaudy cement mixer Levittown accent that sends all the lemurs scaling my chest to see, and she actually had pretty feet. And so I took this as a kindness incomparable, and probably I fell a little bit in love with her for that afternoon, and with the weird white streak in her hair and her machine gun chatter and her gum snapping. And so I slid my feet from beneath my Power Man and Iron Fist comic book into the sun, for which they acted like plants, opening their tiny mouths to the food hurtling to them through the solar system. And like plants, you could watch them almost smile, almost say thank you. You could watch them turn colors and be almost emboldened, none of which Tina saw because she was probably digging in her purse or talking about that hottie on The Real World, or yelling at some friend's little sister to put her ass in her trunks, or pouring the crumbs of her Fritos into her thrown open mouth. But do you really think I'm talking to you about my feet? Of course she's dead. Tina was her name, of leukemia. So I heard. Why else would I try sadly to make music of her unremarkable kindness? I'm trying, I think, to forgive myself for something I don't know what. But what I do know is that I love the moment when the poet says, I am trying to do this, or I'm trying to do that. Sometimes it's a horseshit trick, but sometimes it's a way by which the poet says, I wish I could tell you truly of the little factory in my head, the smokestacks chuffing, the dandelions and purslane and willows of sweet clover prying through the blacktop. I wish I could tell you how inside is the steady mumble and clank of machines, but mostly I wish I could tell you of the footsteps I hear, more than I can ever count, all of whose gates I can discern by listening closely, which promptly disappear after being lodged again here, where we started, in the factory where loss makes all things beautiful grow. And I'll do one more. Thank you. This is called Weeping. And this poem, I just, it's such a sweet poem to me because it's my, damn, Samantha's out there, yo, what's up? What's up? Oh my God, we were in the same room the other day and I totally just, I'm giving you a hug right now. This little poem is a story. I mean, inside the story is that my brother's family, my brother, my sister-in-law, and their kids, my nieces were out, and they were around for like 2 or 3 days out here in Indiana where I live. And the day they were leaving, my niece woke up and she was like crying at like eating her waffle and crying. And I was like, she said she's gonna have to leave her uncle. And I was like getting all choked up myself. And then we find out that it was actually, she had this friend, this moth, who she became friends with. And it wasn't her uncle at all. It was the butterfly. Anyway, here's the poem. Maybe I should have told you that story after the poem, but oh well, here we go. Weeping. I'm thinking here of the Proto-Indo-European root, which means the precise sound of a flower bud unwrapping, and the tiny racket a seed makes cracking open in the dark, which has evolved in a handful of Latinate languages to mean the sound of lovers exiting each other, implying as well the space between them, from which usage is implying as well the space between them, which usage is seen first in Dante in the 14th century, elbowing it for good into our mouths and minds, and of course the sweet bead of sugar imperceptibly moseying from the fig's tiny eye, precisely unlike sorrow, which the assembly of insects sipping there will tell you. When I tell you my niece, without fit or wail, knowing her friend Emma had left and not said goodbye, having spent the better part of the day resting on her finger, sometimes opening her wings, which were lustrous brown with gold spots, to steady herself at the child-made gale, or when she was tossed into the air while my niece took her turn at pickup sticks, until calling Emma by holding her finger in the air, to which Emma would wobble down. And Michaela said, "Deal us in," when we broke out the dominoes, at which they made a formidable duo, whispering to each other instructions. And while the adults babbled our various dooms, Michaela and Emma went into the bedroom where they sang and danced. And I think I heard Michaela reading Emma her favorite book, both of them slapping their thighs, leaning into each other. Then at bedtime, Michaela put on her PJs carefully, first the left arm through while Emma teetered on the right, and then the other. And in the dark, Michaela whispered to Emma, who had threaded her many legs into the band of Michaela's sleeve while she drifted, watching Emma's wings slowly open and close. And Emma must have flown away for good, judging from the not brutal silence at breakfast, as Michaela chewed the waffle goofily with her one front tooth gone, and weakly smiled. looking into the corners of the room for her friend, for Emma, who had left without saying goodbye, the tears easily rolling from her eyes. When I say she was weeping, when I say she wept. Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. I think I can speak for everyone when I say it feels like we're in person. I'm not sure if you all feel that way, but thank you so much, Ross, for that beautiful, incredible, lovely reading. Thank you for those poems and for sharing your story. So next, we are going to walk through our writing prompts that you have so kindly provided for us, and we'll do some more writing. I don't know why I'm out of breath, like I just read, but all right, Ross, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, so among the things that I do as a teacher, but also part of my writing sort of practice, my most recent book that came out a couple months ago, it's actually called The Book of More Delights, which is a follow-up to a book called The Book of Delights. And Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. Part of the practice that I try to do, and I try to do with my students, is to just sort of note the things that we found beautiful. And often I'll come to class and be like, well, let's just go around in the room and say the stuff that we've seen that was beautiful on the way to class. So this exercise is just in 5 minutes, as quickly as you possibly can, list, and you can describe them a little bit, but list 15 to 20 things that you found beautiful today. So today. And if you have to get creative and thinking about it, it doesn't have to be in the material world. It could also be in memory. It could also be in dreams. It could also, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 15 to 20 things of what you found beautiful today. And if you go more, that's great. If you don't get to 15, you're great too. Yeah, so the next one is, it's a sort of cousin to this, you could say, but like a little different. And the question is simply, we're just going to make a list, and it's just who has cared for you. And you could make it who has cared for you today, or you could just like make it a kind of, associative, like just pile up list of who has cared for you. But I would also say, like, let that who be the broadest kind of who that might be. So with, like, who is usually like the pronoun of people. But we could either like expand that or like imagine that we're all people, including the trees and the bugs and the microbes and the on and on and on. Cool. Is that 5 minutes, Asia?
Yes, 5 minutes. Incredible, y'all. Thank you so much. Okay. I'm just smiling so much. My face is just blank sore. So next, I hope you all are geared up with your questions. Ross, I hope you're ready. We'll move into our Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask Ross. But yes, thank you again, Ross, for being here.
Pleasure.
Hey, Adrian, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. There is a poem in Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude that I really connected with called Spoon for Don Belton. There's a part towards the end that goes, the way my dead do sometimes, looking straight into their homes, which hopefully have flowers in a vase on a big wooden table and a comfortable chair or two, and huge windows through which light pours to wash clean and make a touch less awful what forever otherwise will hurt. This quote reminded me of another quote, a Rumi quote that goes, the wound is the place where the light enters you. What do you make of this comparison between Rumi's words and your own? Do you see the parallel?
Great. I think I do. In a way, I sort of think that the Rumi quote, obviously it's Rumi. It's a different kind of wisdom. And it's sort of, I feel like, in a way, I feel like that Rumi quote is like a handful of steps beyond where the poem Spoon got to. Because the poem Spoon is just like, this will be pain. This will be hurt, and that is how that. Of course, just to sort of like make the life and the poem, collaborators in a way. So often when I think of my beloveds who are gone, no matter how they left, there's light, So I love that. I love that connection between the two, or the way that you sort of drew that between the two. I feel like in a way that Spoon poem it's doing a lot of things. It's a poem. I'm very interested in that poem, but still it remains a little puzzling to me still. Like it's one of the, like a poem that I feel lucky, like, whoa, how'd that happen? Took a long time to write, but there are these turns in it, and I'm like, oh. And one of those turns is precisely what you sort of mentioned, that thing of like where somehow it was made available to me that one of the things that it means to be in relationship with our dead, which I think we always are, is that maybe we're able to provide for them a place, a well-lit place, or a sweet place, or a gentle place, or and that in itself is a kind of like that's a kind of care maybe that we're attempting to provide for them in their different form, however you want to call it, in the form, one of the forms, which is being inside our bodies, or inside our minds at that table, a well-lit room or something like that. That's a beautiful question. I could think about this for a long time. But yeah, I'm so glad that you put those two things together. I wouldn't have done that on my own. Yeah, thank you.
Maya?
So with your piece, the Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, I wanted to ask you about the role of longing in the piece, because it felt so present and yet so just maybe, I don't know if unexpected is the right word when dealing with the theme of gratitude, because gratitude implies a certain acceptance of things as they are, and longing is it's a yearning for something that isn't there. And so I wanted to ask what the role of longing is in the piece, and whether it has a place in the piece, and how you sort of reconcile gratitude and longing in this piece, and just in the world about you.
Great question. That's a tough one. That's tough. Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I know about the book, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude, is that it was in writing that book where I learned very plainly that elegies, the poems for the dead, are also erotic poems. By erotic, meaning poems of longing, and erotic poems and poems of longing are so often elegies. If not, if for no other reason than part of the sort of longing is because our time here is finite. So in a way, there's a certain way that longing depends on the fact that we will not always be here with each other. But that said, that question of like, it's such a great question, because gratitude is absolutely, it's a sort of, as you said, it's sort of, it's a practice of attending to what is here. And I think of like the sort of that exercise of like how you've been cared for, or what cares for you, is a kind of gratitude practice to me, like deep gratitude, not superficial gratitude. I mean, the fundamental gratitude. And longing itself implies, in a way, I'm sort of restating your very astute question. Longing itself suggests a desire for what's not here. God, how do longing and gratitude sort of coincide? I think probably in one way I would say that to rest in I don't know, I'm just wondering, maybe, to rest in a state of like pure gratitude is almost like without longing, without, which is also to say without desire, probably. It's almost like, that's almost getting enlightened. You know? So I'm just kind of like, what is that? What would that be? You know? Even if it's like, man, I just want to get downtown and get like those French fries again. You know, those French fries are so good. This is such a great question. I'm gonna have to write about this, because in a way it's sort of like, even as I was saying that, like the longing can be an expression of gratitude, I feel like. You know, and I haven't, you know, you've raised this question because it's both like gratitude sort of suggests the sort of awareness of the presence or something, and longing suggests an absence. And gratitude and absence, you'd think like, in a way, I want to think that they have a kind of fuzzy relationship, you know, but it's also maybe the case that one's absence or the absence of something makes one profoundly grateful for it, of course, you know. You know, so much of our lives, it feels like, I'm 49 years old, so much of our lives is being like, I want to practice being grateful for what is in my life while it's in my life. You know, hard work, you know. You know, how often we're with people that we love and we're like, you know, in your poem, you said something about, you know, telling your best friend, you like, I love you, or I'm in love with you. Like, that's like one of the jobs of this life. You know, I was walking, this is going to sound a little funny, but I was walking the other day in Miami, and I was like, I was at a book festival and I was just taking a walk around this lake, and I was like, I found myself saying, you're dying, not out loud, don't worry. Don't worry. But in my head, you're dying, you're dying, you're dying, you're dying, as a way of saying we're dying. And how do we attend to one another in the midst of that? You know, one of the things I think we might be more inclined to do is be like, yo, just so you know, I'm in love with you. You know, I love you. And this may be the last time that we have the chance to say this, because in fact, the fact of the matter is that, you know, any time could be the last time we have to say this. Yes, memento mori. But so, yeah, beautiful question. That's gonna need a little essay. I'm gonna have to write a little essay about that. You should too. Yeah, thank you for that.
Love when a question is the catalyst for a poem. That's amazing. Any others?
I see a few in the chat.
Mm.
Should I read those?
I would love that, Colleen. Thank you.
Okay. I consider myself a griefful person. I do feel like grief permeates a lot of how I move through the world. I'm curious, how do you engage with grief, any type of grief? What do your conversations with grief look like, whether bodily conversations, internal, external practices, internal feeling, etc.?
Oh, beautiful. I don't know exactly how to answer that, but I do know that grief is something that I've been trying to think a lot about, in part because it's been through a lot of my life a very hard thing to sort of be present with. I think I could say safely, I can say that. And I feel like for all kinds of reasons that, you know, I've been sort of like brought up to sort of not be sad or not be heartbroken or not be needy. One of the things about grief, I think, is that it's many things, but I think one of the things that grief is evidence that we need one another, you know, because you grieve what's gone or you grieve what's changed. And often the change is to be now without. And, you know, there's certain ways, you know, of being, you know, brought up as a quote unquote, there's a certain kind of dude or something, for instance, you know, where that expression of like need is anathema. You're not supposed to do that. And I feel like I've suffered a lot of turmoil on account of that, not being able to acknowledge my need. And part of my practice now is to be constantly acknowledging my need, you know, which is a come back to a kind of gratitude practice. My need, which has no end, you know, which is, you know, it's both it's kind of anathema to a certain kind of masculine idea of the masculine, but it's also anathema to a certain kind of idea of at least the American, you know, where we're supposed to aspire to a kind of needlessness, which there is no such thing, of which there is no such thing. So anyway, you can kind of hear like part of my grief to your question, part of my grief practice or trying to be in contact with it is by expressing what I need, you know, both to other people when I can, you know, my partner, like my beloveds, but also to express and honor the fact that I need the trees and that I need the air and that I need the wind and I need the rain and I need the soil and I need the microbes and I need the sunlight and I need the on and on and on, which we cannot get to the end of. I think that's some of it. But I just want to say this last thing, and I'm so glad for your question, because partly the way I think of it is if we're not able to sort of be in true communion with our grief, we're not able to be in true communion with joy. Like, I don't think, because as far as I think of it, grief and joy are intertwined. They are not extricable. And the more sort of intimate, I would say, we are with our grief, the more radiant will be our joy. I think that's kind of the case, you know. And our grief, for instance, you know, like, again, just to come back to it, if we try to sort of be amidst the world with the you know, deep and abiding cognition, like we understand that we're all only temporarily here, which, you know, depending on how you relate to that is sorrowful, you know. Will foment some sorrow, not to mention other things. We are all heartbroken. To sort of exist with the awareness of that and also the awareness of our own heartbreak, I feel like it inclines us to behave in ways, to practice belonging to each other in ways, which is actually the way I think joy sort of becomes radiant, the way joy radiates from us, when we are practicing caring for each other's heartbreak, you know. And that's why we have dance parties. That's why we dance, you know. We dance because we're heartbroken. We don't dance just because we, you know, like, oh man, like money's flying down on us. Holy shit, let's dance. That's one kind of dance party, whatever. But we really dance because it's like, man, we can't dance forever. You know? We can't dance forever.
Wow. We can't dance forever. That's going to be ringing in my head for some time. But I hate to be a party pooper. I know there are more questions in the chat. Thank you all so much for generating those questions. Thank you, Ross, for those lovely, eloquent answers. But we have exceeded our time for tonight's Friday Night Salon. But I'm just going to quickly run through these events one more time. Or, Emily, should I just go ahead and...
Can I butt in real quick for 1 second?
Yes, please.
I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This was so lovely. Such a nice thing to get the opportunity to be a part of. And also for everyone for chipping in and writing and like sharing, like that kind of generosity. It's just like so beautiful to be in the presence of. So thank you for bringing me in for a little bit.